I'm about to say something that will annoy Nintendo, Apple, PlayStation, Xbox, and even PC fans. Basically, everyone. Nintendo is the Apple of gaming.
What?
Yep, and I don't mean this as an insult. Or maybe it is. I don't even know. But seriously, once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Nintendo is usually not the most powerful, not the cheapest, not the most open, not the most generous with discounts, not the best at online services, and definitely not the company you look at and say, whoa, this company really listened to everything the internet wants. So we complain, make memes. We always say that Nintendo is so behind. Yet whenever Nintendo drops a new console, a new Zelda, a new Mario Kart, or a new Pokemon, we all succumb and eventually buy them instantly. And that is exactly why Nintendo reminds me so much of Apple. Because both companies understand something that a lot of their competitors forget. People do not just buy specs for the sake of buying specs. They buy trust, they buy simplicity, and they buy identity. And in Nintendo's case, that feeling is powerful enough to make people forgive almost anything. On paper, Nintendo should not be this successful. If you only judge gaming like a spec sheet, Nintendo makes no sense at all. When Sony and Microsoft are fighting over performance, Nintendo often walks in with something that looks weaker, weirder, and less next gen. The Wii was not trying to outpower the Xbox 360 or the PS3, yet it managed to outsell both consoles. The DS looked strange with two screens and is weaker technically speaking when compared to the PSP, yet the DS was the better selling console. The Switch was basically a tablet with maybe slightly better performance compared to the PS3 and Xbox 360, yet it drastically outsold the PS4 and it wiped its ass off with Xbox One. The Wii U was basically, well, what even was the Wii U? Well, maybe the Wii U is not a great example, but you get the point. And that tells you something very important. Nintendo is not winning because it wins every spec comparison. Nintendo wins because it plays a different game. And this is where comparing Nintendo with Apple starts making more sense. Apple also built its entire identity around something bigger than specs. Of course, every year they'll talk about faster chips, better cameras, and more RAM, although with the current RAM situation, maybe they should mention that a little more. But that's never been the real product. The real product is the complete experience, the hardware, the OS, the services, the ecosystem, and the feeling that everything was designed to work perfectly well together. Nintendo follows the exact same philosophy. It isn't just selling you a console, it's selling you Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, Smash Bros, Mario Kart, the Joy-Cons, the eShop, the shitty Nintendo Switch Online, the convenience of owning a Switch, couch multiplayer, and that Nintendo feeling that is very hard to explain. The console is simply the gateway into that entire experience. And that is exactly why Nintendo's biggest game don't just feel like exclusives. They feel like they were built for the hardware itself. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe has sold over 71 million copies, which is equal to roughly 46% of all Switch hardware sales. Animal Crossing New Horizons is almost at 50 million, around 32%. Breath of the Wild is over 33 million, around 22%. These aren't just hit games, they are system sellers. In many ways, they are the console. After decades of consistently delivering that experience, Nintendo has earned something even more valuable than powerful hardware, and that is trust. When a new Mario Kart release is announced, people know exactly what to expect. When a new Zelda releases, people assume it will define the generation. It is the same reason people buy an iPhone knowing it will integrate seamlessly with the rest of the Apple ecosystem. Neither company is really selling hardware anymore. They are selling confidence. The confidence that you already know what you're getting into before even opening the box. And that is both Nintendo's greatest strength, but also, as we'll see later, the reason so many people find the company very frustrating. Because these two companies have been major figures in their respective industries, the trust they earn throughout the years is very expensive. This is where you start hearing about the Nintendo tax or the Apple tax. Every Nintendo fan knows exactly what I mean here. You look at an old game and think, surely this should be discounted by now. But nope, it's still at full price. Breath of the Wild is still listed at $59.99. Mario Kart Deluxe, which by the way, everyone left for the new Mario Kart World, is still at full price. Nintendo games just sit there like luxury products. They hold value, and even when Nintendo finally decides to make sales on their games, they barely drop the price. And the same idea applies to Apple products as well. Apple products also hold their value better than most tech products. Just look at the second hand Mac market. You will notice that prices do drop, but not by a significant amount. And sometimes these companies can become a little too arrogant because of how successful they are. They often create a problem, then sell you the solution. Apple is probably the best example of this, especially when they decide to remove the headphone jack from the iPhone and then introduce the AirPods. We can see a similar pattern with Nintendo today. Just look at Donkey Kong Bonanza, which received a paid DLC only 2 months after launch. Or the fact that Nintendo announced a new Pokemon game and its DLC on the very same day. What is funny here is that everyone is arguing today about GTA 6 charging $80 for the base game and offering a more expensive edition with extra content. Meanwhile, Nintendo was already pulling this move and somehow people already forgot about it. On top of what we've said before, both of these companies put too much control and kinda locks you behind closed doors. This can be both good and bad for the consumer. Nintendo's reputation on this is especially intense. Fan games, too risky. Emulation, too risky. The Yuzu emulator case is probably the clearest modern example. Tropic Haze agreed to settle with Nintendo for $2.4 million and accepted a permanent injunction that ended distribution and support for Yuzu. And again, you can argue Nintendo has legal reasons, but from a fan perspective, it creates this weird relationship. Nintendo makes some of the most joyful games in the world, but they only allow you to enjoy them based on their terms, which they happen to be too strict at times. The company itself feels like a locked door. That is the Apple comparison. You are allowed to enjoy Apple products to their full capabilities, but only within the Apple ecosystem. Another underrated similarity to mention is that both companies turned announcement into rituals. Apple has Apple events, Nintendo has Nintendo Directs, and both are weirdly similar. Fans watch them live, the internet tries to predict everything, leaks appear, rumors spread, and then, after the event is done, everyone argues about whether it was amazing or the worst thing ever. And finally, we come to the most important point. Nintendo is not competing with PlayStation and Xbox in the same way that PlayStation and Xbox compete with each other. PlayStation and Xbox often feel like they are fighting over the same customer. Nintendo is doing something else completely. I feel like Nintendo wants to be the second home console, the console that works perfectly well when paired with another powerful system like a PC or PS5 or even the Xbox Series X. Nintendo wants to be the family console, the nostalgia console, the I don't usually play games but I'll play Mario Kart console, the Zelda and Mario console. And that is exactly what Apple does in tech. Apple doesn't need to convince every Android power user. Nintendo doesn't need to convince every PC gamer as well. They are not trying to win every argument. They are just simply trying to be irreplaceable to their own audience. So why do we forgive them? Because they built emotional trust, and emotional trust is stronger than technical arguments. You can tell someone that the Switch is underpowered, and they'll say, yeah, but can your Xbox let you play Zelda while taking a shit? You can tell a Nintendo fan that, Nintendo games are expensive and almost never go on sale, and they'll say, yeah, but I can still play Pokemon just like I did when I was a kid. You can tell an Apple user that Apple is behind in AI or that Android gives you far more flexibility. And they probably say, yeah, but blue bubbles. None of these are technical arguments. They are emotional ones. And that is exactly the point. Nintendo is probably the only company that still feels like childhood. More than anyone else, they understand that games are supposed to be fun. Nintendo can be one of the most stubborn companies in the industry. It has weaker hardware, weaker online services, and on paper, it often falls behind the competition. Yet it continues to get away with it because it has spent decades earning the trust of its audience. Mario, Zelda, and Pokemon aren't just franchises, they have been part of people's lives since childhood. That kind of connection is incredibly difficult to replace. Even at its lowest point during the Wii U era, Nintendo doubled down on its own IPs and continued to deliver high quality games. That trust wasn't built overnight, it was earned across generations.